Over the history of life on Earth, many top predators have come and gone, many with razor-sharp teeth, deadly curved talons, and spines of all calibers. These predators were at the highest place on their food chains. These animals only feared members of their own species. They were the most formidable living weapons to ever evolve in their place and time. All of these animals were similar, yet vastly different from one another. Some were insects, reptiles, or birds, the biggest parallel amongst them being their innate ability to efficiently take down their prey and fight for survival. However, the life of these top predators was not a never-ending cycle of kill or be killed, for there is downtime and critical life events that shape the individual animal into their own creature. The most well-known of these top predators was a culmination of hundreds of millions of years of evolution underneath the iron claw of other top predators. This predator's ancestral stock survived in smaller ecological niches until the sauropod killers went extinct. They took charge and became some of the most powerful meat-eating animals to ever evolve on land. The queen of these animals is known far and wide throughout the world by human beings of every age, creed, ethnicity, or education level. Ever since this creature was discovered nearly 100 years ago, it has captured the public's imagination in new and terrifying ways. And our understanding of its biology and place in the vast universe continues to burgeon and take on a life of its own, so entrenched in our collective psyche and pop culture norms that it is sometimes hard to overlook the raw power and obviously savage nature of such a primordial beast, for this monster was surely no monster, but just an animal that lived as most do, simply and meaningfully. This beast of absolute grandeur is the one and only, the Tyrant Lizard King, the Tyrannosaurus. Welcome to the first episode in a very special mini-series about Tyrannosaurus. As one of the most well-studied and well-understood members of Dinosauria, or any pre-Pleistocene fauna in general, there is a lot to cover on Tyrannosaurus. So let us not dilly-dally. This enormous beast has a lot of information to back up what our image of it is in today's scientific academia. The first remains of Tyrannosaurus were not attributed to the nomenclatural name of Tyrannosaurus rex. The remains of Tyrannosaurus were also discovered during the 1800s and the Bone Wars. Therefore, the paleontological rules and procedures had not yet been refined. With few exceptions, every single fossil with even the slightest difference to any other fossil was determined to be of a different animal regardless of age and location. Secondarily, the paleontologists of the time, especially Edward Drinker Cope and Othniel Charles Marsh, strived to find and name as many new taxa as they could, regardless of whether or not the animals they were finding had already been found. Fame and notoriety is what they sought. The point of this matter is that the first remains of Tyrannosaurus were not named Tyrannosaurus rex, and in fact, many of the remains, though fragmentary, would have been just complete enough, according to some scientists, to be the first binomial name attributed to the remains to be later coined Tyrannosaurus. In effect, were it not for the fearsome presence the name Tyrannosaurus rex has, we'd be calling the animal something very different. Geologist, artist, writer, and paleontologist Arthur Lakes discovered teeth in 1874 near Golden, Colorado. These teeth were given neither scientific name nor description. Dubbed fossil saurian tooth, numerical designation YPM4192, these underestimated fragments and sketches of the teeth by local civic leader Edward Berthoud were sent to the famed paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh of the Yale Peabody Museum in New Haven, Connecticut, where they remain to this day, having never seen a formal description until it was re-examined by paleontologist Kenneth Carpenter of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science in 2002, and determined not only to come from the infamous taxon T. rex, but also to be the very first fossil remains ever found of the beast, an unremarkable discovery that would turn out to be the first clues that paleontology was onto something, something big, something with teeth, really, really big teeth. Many years passed until more material was uncovered. In 1888, geologist George L. Cannon had found pieces of jawbone in the Denver Basin, the same locale as the first teeth fossils. Unfortunately, the fossils he saw or found are unavailable to us for unknown reasons. But that was the end of the Tyrannosaurid fossils without proper descriptions, for from this point in history forward, plenty more fossil remains would be recovered, both fragmentary and nearly complete. In 1890 and 1891, paleontologist John Bell Hatcher found a good assemblage of parts and pieces. All in all, he found a partial right metatarsal, left femur, tibia, partial fibula, and a right ilium. In 1896, these fossil remains were analysed by Othniel Charles Marsh, who determined them to belong to the taxon Ornithomimus grandis. He saw the large size of these remains and determined them to belong to an ornithomimosaur that was one of the destructive enemies of the herbivorous Ceratopsidae. It is interesting to note just how similar some of the basic skeletal anatomy of Tyrannosauridae is to Ornithomimosauria, a good indication of their genetic affinities, but we'll come back to that notion a bit later. We must go backwards in time just a tad in order to go further, as the story of Tyrannosaurus brings us to paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope, infamous rival of Othniel Charles Marsh. In 1892, Cope had found a few vertebral fragments about the same area as Hatcher had found his fragmentary fossils. Thus, the first new scientific classification was given to pieces that would eventually be determined to belong to T. rex. Cope designated his vertebrae Manospondylus gigas, which translates to giant porous vertebra. He thought these vertebrae belonged to an agathalmid dinosaur, what we now know as a ceratopsian. However, that was soon to be proven false. What followed was a large influx of partial remains that would help to focus in on what this beast actually was. In 1900, Henry Fairfield Osborn of the American Museum of Natural History sent paleontologist Barnum Brown out to the same areas of Wyoming that were explored by John Bell Hatcher in search of the remains of Triceratops for display within the museum. However, on top of bits of Triceratops, Barnum Brown and his crew discovered much more. In Wyoming, Brown and company found a 13% complete disarticulated fossilized skeleton of a large carnivorous dinosaur, what they described as Ceratosaurus-like in appearance, what was undoubtedly a theropod dinosaur, and what paleontologists at the time would call a carnosaur. These remains were named Dynamasaurus imperiosus, the powerful imperial reptile. And boy, what a monster this creature would have been. That is, if the remains found were really of the animal it was thought to belong to. Unfortunately for us, there was more than just Tyrannosaurus remains found in this specimen, which is why the people who found it thought it was like nothing we'd ever seen before. The specimen included lower jaws, teeth, cervical and dorsal vertebrae, ribs, part of the hips, and pieces of limbs from a carnivorous dinosaur, but also dermal plates and teeth from an ankylosaur, now considered a nodosaur, as well as the teeth and jaws of a hadrosaur, the frill of a ceratopsian, fish scales, and a multitude of indeterminable fossil remains. Osborn named it Dynamasaurus due to the osteoderms found with it, which were thought to cover the animal in life, before it was found that they belonged to a completely different animal. Essentially, the finders thought they had discovered what Hasbro would eventually call the Ultimasaurus. In 1902, another skeleton had been found by Barnum Brown in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana. This specimen went on to be designated CM9380. Osborn named this creature Tyrannosaurus rex, the Tyrant Lizard King. However, Henry Fairfield Osborn used both the specimen of Dynamasaurus and Tyrannosaurus in the same paper describing them both, essentially as two distinct organisms. It was not until 1906 that he synonymized them both into the same taxon, as they both showed signs of belonging to the same kind of animal. Thus, the internationally acclaimed and culturally pervasive name that sparks a sense of awe and bewilderment in the world was born: Tyrannosaurus rex. According to the rules of scientific nomenclature, the first name attributed to fossil remains will always be held in first regard. Therefore, technically, Tyrannosaurus rex should be invalid, and the name first given to the remains of this animal would be its true name, Manospondylus gigas, especially since neither of the two taxa were formally synonymized. Manospondylus, huh? Doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it? Well, thanks to the perpetuated use of Tyrannosaurus rex, it has taken priority as a nomen protectum, or protected name. Barnum Brown continued his search for more Tyrannosaurus specimens. In 1908, he found a 48% complete skeleton of the animal in Dry Creek, Montana, which included the most complete skull yet found. This specimen was designated AMNH 5027 and was the most complete mounted specimen to be displayed for quite some time. Described by Osborn in 1912 and 1916, the find consisted of mostly complete skull, cervical, dorsal and sacral vertebrae, 18 caudal vertebrae, chevrons, cervical ribs, dorsal ribs, ilia, ischia and pubes. This specimen, having much of its spinal column intact, gave a better image of what the animal was like, and would later be a clue that it belonged to a separate family aside from the Jurassic carnosaurs that paleontologists of the time lumped all theropods into. By 1912, 8 skeletons had been recovered. Not many more skeletons were found with as great a frequency until the 1980s, as had been found up to the 1910s. What follows is a comprehensive list of all fossil specimens referable to Tyrannosaurus rex, in the order in which they were found. Huxley, 1946. Completion, 16%. In 1946, paleontologist Charles Sternberg found fragments of a Tyrannosaurus outside the town of Huxley along the Red Deer River, Alberta. Unfortunately, he only found bits and pieces and concluded that it had been washed away without enough left behind to justify excavation. Found within the Scollard Formation, paleontologist Philip Currie, then of Provincial Museum of Alberta, went back to the locale and found the rest of the specimen in 1981. At 16% complete, Currie found a small fragment of the skull known as the postorbital, as well as neck and back vertebrae, various pieces of the pelvis, and bits of the legs and feet. Harley, 1966. Completion, 12%. In 1966, paleontologist Harley Garbani, along with his team from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, discovered a fragmentary skeleton with a somewhat complete skull in the Hell Creek Formation of Jordan, Montana. The remains included the right scapula, coracoid, ulna, both ischia, right femur, tibia, right foot, and 2 phalanges from the left foot. Designated Harley, this skull was the largest known at the time and the largest to be displayed, a rather mature individual. MOR 008, 1960s. MSU geologist Bill McCannis found fragments of a Tyrannosaurus skull and bits of the vertebrae in the late 1960s in the Hell Creek Formation. It had undergone reconstruction in the 1980s, finishing in 2006. This skull, designated MOR 008, is absolutely enormous and potentially larger than that of the famous Sioux specimen. Though the way in which it was reconstructed may be a tad bit flawed, thus the true size may be smaller. More on that later though. It is currently on display at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. Mud Butte T-Rex, 1980. Completion, 27%. Discovered in 1980 by rancher and amateur fossil collector Jennings Floden, the Mud Butte T-Rex was found on the discoverer's ranch and is mostly skull and spinal material. This specimen comes from the Hell Creek Formation of South Dakota and resides in the Museum of Geology, where it has been in a process of being prepared ever since. Black Beauty, 1980. Completion, 28%. One beautiful morning in 1980, on a fishing trip in Crow's Nest Pass, Alberta, Jeff Baker and his friend came across something incredibly remarkable. The bone of a prehistoric beast. This bone belongs to Black Beauty, an adult Tyrannosaurus with a 28% complete skeleton. Excavation began in 1982 and it is one of the most well-known Tyrannosaurus mounts alongside Sue and the American Museum of Natural History's centerpiece. The specimen is jet black due to the type of minerals that leached into the bones during fossilization. Samson, 1987. Completion 40%. This specimen was originally found on private land in South Dakota in 1987 by Michael Zimmerscheid. Him and other paleontologists had initially determined it to have washed away without a trace. Alan and Robert Dietrich rediscovered this specimen in 1992, after relocating it as well as finding a nearly complete and undistorted skull. It was put up for auction in 2000 under the name Z-Rex and eventually sold in 2001. At which time it was renamed Samson. It was prepared by the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in 2004, which finished in 2006, and was then sold again in 2009, and then put on an educational tour. This rather complete specimen reached 39 feet in length. Stan, 1987. Completion 63%. Stan Sacrison found the remains of a Tyrannosaurus near Buffalo, South Dakota in the Hell Creek Formation. Currently housed at the Black Hills Institute of Geological Research, it is one of the most complete Tyrannosaurus specimens ever found. It consists of a nearly complete skull, most of the spinal column, ribs, pelvic girdle, and much of the arms and legs. As one of the most complete specimens, it has helped build on the understanding of this animal and has been cast and reproduced for museums all over the world. You've probably met Stan without even knowing it. Wankel, 1988. Completion 46%. World-renowned paleontologist Jack Horner helped excavate and describe a Tyrannosaurus specimen out of an island in the Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge in Montana. The specimen was discovered by rancher Kathy Wankel while out hiking with her family. Imagine that, you're just out walking along and boom, Tyrannosaurus Rex is looking back at you. Coming from the Hell Creek sediments, as many of the other Tyrannosaurus specimens, this fossil was helped along its way to its museum by the US Army Corps of Engineers and is technically still owned by them. The specimen, 46% complete, consists of the skull, one of the most complete forearms, ribs, vertebrae, and much more. Sue, 1990. Completion 73%. Ah yes, Sue. Arguably one of the most famous or infamous specimens of Tyrannosaurus ever found, depending on how you look at it. She has quite a story behind her. Sue is to date the most complete Tyrannosaurus specimen at 73% complete. It has been fundamental in our understanding of this animal and its evolutionary group, further expanding our knowledge of the ecosystem in which it lived. The story of this specimen is long and dramatic, and there has even been a documentary film produced about the history revolving the discovery entitled Dinosaur 13. So we won't go into every detail, since you should go check that film out. But here begins the tale of Sue the Tyrannosaurus. It all started during the summer of 1990. A paleontological team from the Black Hills Institute of Geological Research, including Sue Hendrickson, for which the specimen was named, and Peter Larson, president of the institution, found and excavated a new specimen of Tyrannosaurus. Sue had found the remains after exploring the nearby cliffs after a season of collecting Edmontosaurus remains. Larson and crew thought they had acquired the rights to the fossil, since they paid a fee of $5,000 to excavate the fossil, thinking they had the rights to the fossil, when they only had the rights to excavate it. On top of that, the owner of the land, Maurice Williams, belongs to the Sioux tribe, and the tribe claimed they owned the land the fossil was on. The land in which the fossils was found turned out to be owned by the United States Department of Interior. So, since the fossils belonged to the USDI, the FBI and National Guard had to get involved. raided the site in which the fossils were being prepared in a SWAT-styled attack that cost the federal government $1 million and placed the fossils within a warehouse at the South Dakota School of Mines, which may have been dangerous and damaging to the condition of the fossils. It was taken back by Williams and promptly sold to the highest bidder at an auction. Now, we're not going to make any political cases here on the Expeditioners Discovery Guild, since we are here for the science, not opinion. But come on, all fossils, especially with inherent importance to our collective understanding of our past, should belong to no one but science. For that is why we strive to continue looking for more fossils, for the more we find, the bigger and brighter our image of the past is. It is our natural born right as human beings to know about, learn and observe these precious remains. That isn't to say there aren't any grey lines within this whole subject, which could fill an entire video on its own, so we'll leave it at that. Fortunately for Sue and science in general, the Chicago Field Museum, a fine institution of science and learning, got help from Disney, McDonald's and assorted charities to acquire the find, to refrain from allowing it to be lost to science forever. It was sold for a grand total of $8,362,500. $7.6 million of which went tax-free to Maurice Williams. Unfortunately and unjustly, Peter Larson was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, which is 4 times the minimum amount required for the violation of the 1906 Antiquities Act, which it technically didn't violate anyway. But what a find Sue really is. The remains found include a complete skull, much of the cervical, dorsal, sacral and caudal vertebrae, cervical and dorsal ribs, both scapulae and coracoids, the wishbone or furcula, much of the right arm, a complete pelvic girdle, both of the legs and much of the feet. Enough material to give a much more complete image of the animal in general. Not only was it the most complete Tyrannosaurus ever discovered, but also the largest at 42 feet long and 12 feet tall. Scotty, 1991. Completion 40% plus. During the tail end of the summer of 1991, high school principal Robert Gebhardt accompanied Royal Saskatchewan Museum paleontologists to the Frenchman River Valley. It took him only half a day to find a tooth, and eventually a vertebra that were unmistakably from a Tyrannosaurus. And thus, Scotty the Tyrannosaurus was discovered. At more than 40% complete, this specimen is one of the largest and most complete as well, with much of the skeleton having been found, and it represents a mature individual of 40 feet. Duffy, 1993. Completion 30%. This specimen was scattered over an area of 1 acre, but was rather complete considering. Found in 1993 by Stan Sakrason, who also found the Stan specimen. It had a 70% complete skull and represents an immature individual of roughly adolescent age. It took 5 collecting seasons to recover all of the specimen's material, of which much of the post-cranial skeleton is known. Pex Rex, 1997. Completion 60%. Found in 1997, Pex Rex comes from, you guessed it, the Hell Creek Formation of Montana. It was an adult when it died and was rather complete. It is one of the only specimens of Tyrannosaurus to have an intact metacarpal 3 preserved with its remains. Bucky, 1998. Completion 40%. Found in 1998 by a rancher and rodeo cowboy Bucky Der Flinger, hence the name, this Tyrannosaurus specimen is another very complete one. Der Flinger found the specimen at the age of 20 while breaking in a young horse. He came across a toe bone, which led to the rest of the skeleton. A skeleton which was easy to prepare and excavate since it was encased in soft rock matrix. This specimen showcases a young adult not quite small enough to truly be a juvenile at 34 feet in length. This specimen also has one of the most well-preserved and complete spinal columns ever found for the genus, from the base of the skull past the pelvis, as well as a nearly full set of gastralia or belly ribs and an ulna. And, as if this find didn't have enough firsts, it It is also the first specimen to have a preserved wishbone, also known as a furcula, which is a shared characteristic of most, if not all, theropod dinosaurs and their modern descendants. It's really awesome to find one in any given specimen, since most, if not all, likely had them. You just don't get to see them very often. Tinker, 1998. The case of the Tinker specimen lies in similar muddy waters as Sue, unfortunately, and much of the fossils remain in a warehouse yet to be fully studied. The remains of this juvenile Tyrannosaurus were found by fossil prospector Mark Eastman, who bought the rights to the fossils from the landowner and promptly sold them to a group of fossil hunters, led by Ron Frithiof. Frithiof and his team continued their excavation. However, the land in which the specimen was found belonged to rancher Gary Gilbert. But the land owned by Gilbert was on lease to him by the county, and once the county realised the importance of the fossil find, and more importantly for people like that, how much money such a find could reel in, the county officials claimed that Frithiof had illegally taken the fossils out of their land. But he had previously acquired a lease on the land, and the rights to excavation, so it was ruled that the county did not have the rights they thought they had. However, due to the lease taken out on the land, Frithiof still has to give 10% of his profits to the county. Some of the skeleton remains still within the earth, and those pieces that have been unearthed are locked away in bankruptcy proceedings. So it will likely be some time before science gets to understand poor old Tinker. B-Rex, 2000. Completion, 37%. The B-Rex specimen is a strange case indeed. Although not the most complete, at 37%, it holds a handful of intriguing and technique-changing observations that have helped progress the science of paleontology to some degree. This specimen was discovered by fossil preparator Bob Harmon in 2000 in Hell Creek Formation of Montana in Charles M. Russell National Wildlife Refuge. Much of the overall skeleton was found well preserved, though not much of it complete. The entire skull was found in pieces, and much of the torso was recovered as well. The marrow cavity of one of the leg bones of this specimen was intentionally exposed due to Mary Schweitzer's breaking of the fossil for shipping. After being examined, it was found that the inside preserved what appeared to be fossilized soft tissue, and upon further inspection, fossilized blood vessels and cells. What a beautiful thing. We can see what the blood of an ancient animal looked like. A pristine find. At the time of this particular discovery, it was hypothesized that it could either be fossilized blood and soft tissue, or permineralized biofilm produced by bacteria that had been digesting and breaking down the specimen prior to fossilization. However, the debate was put to rest in 2016, when Schweitzer et al. Analyzed the soft tissue and found it to be medullary bone. Medullary bone is a very special type of bone produced within the bones of birds when they are ready to produce their eggs, as a backup reservoir of calcium, which makes up the shell of the eggs. This study, having proven this soft tissue to be medullary bone, has given us the first and only tried and true example of the gender of a prehistoric animal. We now know that B-Rex was a female Tyrannosaurus. How amazing, simply wonderful, but this means that we can sex any fossil theropod, and maybe even all other types of dinosaur in a similar way. That is, if the animal has this type of tissue preserved through fossilization within its remains, we know for sure it is female. Y-Rex, 2002. Completion, 38%. Found by policeman and amateur fossil collector Dan Wells and landowner Don Wyrack, this specimen is quite unique. Like most, and pretty much all Tyrannosaurus specimens found in the Hell Creek Formation of South Dakota, it was excavated and prepared by the Black Hills Institute. This specimen was one of the first to be shown excavated live on the Institute's website. Something more organizations need to do, to be honest. This specimen consists of 2 nearly complete legs and feet, and pieces of the skull and torso. A rare find for Tyrannosaurus specimens is complete feet, or more than just bits and pieces, and this specimen had this. Another unique thing about the Y-Rex specimen is its preservation of skin impressions. That's right, we can get a better image of what the outside of Tyrannosaurus looked like. The 12 patches of skin impressions preserve scales from the underside of the animal's tail, but they look more like the bumpy skin of chickens and rounded scales of Gila monsters and leopard geckos, rather than the keeled scales of the squamates or the osteoderm armour of crocodilians. Thomas, 2003. Completion 37%. Thomas the Tyrannosaurus was found by schoolteacher and amateur fossil collector Bob Curry in 2003. The specimen was found in the Hell Creek Formation of Carter County, Montana, and was excavated and prepared by a crew from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, where the specimen remains to this day. 37% complete, the specimen contains complete legs and feet, many parts and pieces of the skull, and an assortment of ribs and vertebrae. Ivan, 2007. Completion 39% to 60%. Found by Alan Komrosky in 2007, this specimen is another of the more complete ones, with the most complete tail of any known Tyrannosaurus specimen, with only 3 vertebrae missing. This specimen was likely 18 years of age at death, and represents a large individual. Since no scientific analysis has been done on this specimen and the specimen itself shares some interesting morphologies, it is uncertain if it truly represents an individual of the species Tyrannosaurus rex. It may be found to be a new species of Tyrannosaurus, but Stephen King of the Museum of World Treasures in Wichita, Kansas, has taken the job of describing the specimen. Those at the Museum of World Treasures have asserted that Ivan is indeed a Tyrannosaurus rex, but it is still as yet not known for sure. Tristan, 2010. Completion 56%. This Tyrannosaurus specimen was found in the Lower Hell Creek Formation of Montana by commercial paleontologist Craig Pfister in 2010. The specimen was then sold to a Danish investment banker who, fortunately for science, agreed to loan it to the Museum für Naturkunde of Berlin. It remained there for no less than 3 years and has been analysed by the museum staff since then. Trix, 2013. Dating to 66 million years ago, this specimen of Tyrannosaurus was found by a team of paleontologists from the Naturalis Biodiversity Centre of the Netherlands. It is a very complete specimen, with most of the remains being preserved. It remains in the only open room of the museum, after which it will go on international tour while the museum fixes up its renovation, at which point it will return by late 2018. Tuft Love Rex, 2016. Completion 20%. The Tuft Love Rex was found, you guessed it, in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana. The specimen was rather complete, with much of the skull intact. However, what makes it truly unique is its size. It was not fully grown, for it was only 15 years at the time of death, but has been estimated to be around 40 feet in length, meaning it would have outgrown both Trix and Sue, the largest and oldest Tyrannosaurus specimens found to date. And that, minus the handful of incredibly fragmentary finds, is the complete list of Tyrannosaurus specimens found to date. Quite an impressive list. There are now more than 50 known specimens, quite some ways from the days of only 15. What was once thought to be a rare animal has shown itself to be quite common in its preservation, even though their fossils are still rather rare to find, thus why their price tag is so large. Now that we have gone over the history of our knowledge of this creature, how it was found, who found it, where it was found, now comes the hard part. Piecing all of the evidence together to get an idea of what Tyrannosaurus was like when it was alive, how it hunted, how it reproduced, and how it died. Next time on the Expeditioners Discovery Guild, we will take you on a multiple part journey to explore the ins and outs of Tyrannosaurus. We take a look into the family history of this impressive genus, looking at how it got to the top of the food chain and where it could have gone, were it not for the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago, in Tyrant Files, Family Tree.